Good morning. So Mike and I are going to talk a little bit about the shape and the size of the market. And I want to reiterate the baseball game is going to be great tonight, so please do join us. I'm looking forward to talking to all of you. I'm going to be up here a lot today, but I do want to know and get to start talking about the local on-demand economy with you all. We're going to be doing several things to augment this program, one of which is launching a weekly podcast about the local on-demand economy, and I'd like each of you to consider being a guest on that show as well. So again, please come to the game, come up and introduce yourself. We're looking forward to helping you and ourselves build this into a very substantial community. The local on-demand organization, oh, there it is. Let's catch up. Is designed to keep human and technical resources working for customers at maximal profit while keeping labor engaged and evolving its skills. Really, it's the growth of labor that we're talking about here, the opportunity to help people find new ways to deploy their skills and to bring this, is that better? Okay. To deploy their skills and to bring more money into their own homes so that they themselves can participate in this on-demand economy. It also calls upon a core feature of the American ethos that I think that the industrial economy has emuted, and that's the importance of individual initiative. And I think that's going to come through as we talk about this all day long. There's a great deal of controversy about whether or not this is the right way or wrong way for us to organize labor. But what I think we need to think about is how do we evolve our work styles to continue to take advantage of the technology that's developing all around us and that we ourselves are developing. So I think we're standing at the brink of the logical and inevitable result of the first 50 years of digitization. It's adaptation as a species that we're doing. More value is concentrated at the edge of the network now in small and medium-sized businesses among networks of individual workers than any company could marshal to respond to them. Citizens have more power. Excuse me, I just said that. We can now think in terms of mixing and matching millions of supply chains to address people individually. And it may be even correct to say that we've evolved a new system for using the resources society has available to it. BIA Kelsey refers to this economic shift as local because to be successful, on-demand services must address the customers where they are, wherever they are. The local economy is entirely consumer-centric. And taken this way, the oft-asked question in local media, what is the definition of local, which is cast as a question of which channel to purchase, has a very simple answer. The customer defines their own locality. My version of local has changed 3 times this week, and it's up to the companies that want to do business with me to provide services to me to keep up. And not only to keep up about where I am, but across the multiple devices I use. It's also important to note that this reorientation of markets around local relationships marks the end of the 40-year enterprise monopoly on deep logistical insight into systems and the value chains that gave corporations tremendous leverage over both labor and retailers. We've talked about the death of Main Street for many years. It's not entirely a coincidence that since 1964, when the IBM System 360, the first commercially produced mainframe, was introduced, productivity has raced ahead of workers' hourly compensation. In fact, it's only gotten worse since the banking collapse of 2008. And throughout that same period, businesses have been hammered by enterprise computing-enabled, single-sourced supply chains that exemplified by organizations like Walmart or Starbucks and copied by many others. We've talked about the death of Main Street over and over since the internet was introduced about 25 years ago. What I think we're looking at is the opportunity to regrow Main Street. So why is this economic transition happening now? Didn't this digital revolution already take place? Well, I think the internet shows that it's taken a while, but software is helping to perfect logistics. And I think logistics could be called the oldest organizational profession of them all. Writing actually developed from accounting tokens in Mesopotamia and Egypt. And 5,600 years later, the internet is showing the power of digitization, but it itself relied on industrial values and priorities. The convenience it delivered was based on standardization. There were standardized products sold to customers through interruptive advertising. It was inserted into mass-produced entertainment, into sports, and even financial programming. These were all stock first and sell later businesses, supply-side businesses that hoped to find a target for their pre-manufactured goods. But the supply-side industrial model gave corporations tremendous power, which you can see in the divergence of compensation and productivity. Now's the time for a small capitalism to grow at the roots of the economy and for global organizations to adapt to the people power below them in the network, really to let the root system regrow for a robust American economy. The internet also showed us the power of code in shaping community, culture, and commerce. We're getting very good at programming. Coders, like their peers in biotechnology, are literally tearing apart living systems, unwinding them and rebuilding them in flight, so to speak. We are living through this efflorescence of human creativity that's aided by computing power and in which changes can be made daily. And some of the companies today, Facebook and the like, they're pushing code 80, 100, 800 times a day sometimes. And that level of experimentation is giving us an opportunity to try many more solutions to the problems of living quickly than we have ever had in the past. And finally, we think that the local on-demand economy could resolve this 5-decade divergence by transferring control of complex supply chains and knowledge both to local businesses and individual workers to use on behalf of customers. The $15 an hour minimum wage movement, which is sweeping the nation right now, is growing because I think people recognize that they're working harder than ever. However, the response to that will be something that's difficult for labor to swallow in response, and that is pay will only be forthcoming when work is actually needed. You won't be paid to sit around and wait to be productive anymore. In the enterprise, on-demand is probably going to emerge as a tool for organizational flexibility, and there, bench-warming middle management really needs to be aware of the fact that their roles are in trouble as well. The bottom line is that companies must recognize that on-demand labor flexibility comes at a cost. If you outsource, you pay a premium for that flexibility. So we've known for the past 5 years, since the arrival of the first crowdsourcing sites, that we're at the end of designing stuff and hoping we can sell it later. This isn't to say that originality will be monopolized by the crowd. Rather, originality will be recognized and rewarded with demand-based signals. So, put it simply, customers will be able to say, make more of that in response to even the rudest prototypes. And allowing for that rapid iteration, companies will be able to move toward a popular design, one that's adopted and purchased by many more people quickly. Ideas will gain currency and products will gather traction from their inception, not simply at the time you manage to get it to market to see whether or not someone will buy what you've made. There's another important facet to demand-based commerce to point out, and that is just as all of us can rate a restaurant today, we'll soon be able to examine the products that we buy for the ethical sourcing or residues of slave labor or negative ecological consequences that we can't support with our money and so will not buy. Consumers are going to configure what they want and when they want it. They can buy a lot less of what is just good enough at the lowest price in the standardized world and focus instead on quality. So business needs also to raise, rather than lower, the respect that we pay to the intangibles of human labor. We need to put behind us this zero-sum idea of winners and losers so that people can concentrate on building shared value and success despite the failures that inevitably happen along the way. We're rich enough, I think, both materially and in spirit, to make this critical change in the organization. So we have to avoid thinking of on-demand labor as cog work. One interchangeable laborer could be replaced with another at any time. A maid, and I'm sure that many of you probably have had this experience, comes into your home and has to have tremendous soft skills to keep that job and to keep coming back. And that maid has to be in demand for the on-demand company providing the connection to him to be successful. If the maid does not have the soft skills to continue to develop the relationship, the on-demand company ultimately will fail because the brand experience will be very poor. And I think that companies that fail to deliver opportunities for workers that excel at relationship building are the ones who are going to be losing workers faster than anyone. I had an interesting conversation on the way over this morning with my Uber driver. He actually works for both Uber and Lyft all the time and simply takes the most recent call he gets. But he says Lyft is such a better deal for him. And he's looking for ways to increase his driving for Lyft. And in a way, sort of arbitraging within his own business model how he gets more money out of both of those companies. That's going to be an incredible stress for local on-demand companies to manage as they move forward. So the agenda today is going to present many perspectives on where the local economy and automation and data interchange and the socioeconomic trends that are contributing to all this can go. How do you take an economy that used to be one big supply chain with one big output and turn it into many supply chains with many different outputs? That's the big challenge here. And the way that we're going to do that is with transparency. We talked today about holacracy. Zappos now lets everybody in the company see everything that's going on in the company. That's actually the way that we're going to be customers in the future. We'll be looking through the entire business and deciding whether we want to be affiliated with them. So I think that creating APIs, offering transparency and more free flow of information will be just nothing but good for these companies. But I don't think that everyone will adopt that. The other thing we want to be able to come away today with is a clear sense of the fact that what works at one place and in one time is not necessarily going to work in another setting. Today we tend to think, there's an Uber for this or an Uber for that. Well, that mindset is a dead end. It's just one solution to the problem. We need to think together about evolving markets and think about Uber as just one possible solution to the problem of transportation. The reason to do this is, and if you think biologically, you'll understand this, I think, monocultures die when they're shocked. And it's because they lack the components to use to construct a response to changing conditions. So I urge you to embrace a notion of the on-demand world that extends beyond the boundaries of major metropolitan areas and celebrates the tiny differences in lifeways across the country. That's how you're going to be local in those many different places. The level of complexity in human society is, as far as we know, the highest in the universe. We collect and use more energy per second per gram than anything that we've discovered in the universe to date. And Harvard astrophysicist Eric Chason graphs this and shows us how this has progressed since the dawn of time. I believe you can see that Moore's law is simply one more expression of this phenomenon. What chip fabrication is doing is riding a bigger wave as humans invent more complex solutions to the problem of living in the universe. And if you look at this graph, and this is, I think, a really important point, think of all 13.8 billion years of history as one day. Break it billions of years down into hours, minutes, and seconds. The entire modern era since 1700 fits into the last 0.3 of 1 second of cosmic time. So we're really only getting started on the evolution of this marketplace and the economy. And if we don't destroy the planet, we are in for an extraordinary ride. But we have to work together in order to avoid destroying the planet. And now we face the inevitable impact of digital technology on the economy after talking about these threats and benefits for more than 30 years. Public and private organizations, local, state, and federal budgets, healthcare and other social support systems, the fabric of all of our social relationships face wrenching change. But they face wrenching change all the time. And we simply have to be comfortable with that and continue to move forward. The ability to shape the inevitable is within our grasp if we avoid fixating on nostalgic defenses of familiar features of the present, which are actually simply passing phenomena. The workplace model may be returning to a much more ad hoc model. And I urge you to look at the career of Benjamin Franklin. The man did not have one job. He had a portfolio of things he did. We believe that we have the idea of a one career life. That is a product of the 20th century. And we shouldn't stick with the 20th century. We live in the 21st already. We need to move on. So we have to ask the question, is it more important to innovate on work styles or to preserve something like a 90-year-old idea of a job for life? I don't think this economy will turn out to be fair for anyone, or for everyone. After all, there are people involved. But it certainly has to be fair enough to survive the judgment of the people living within it. And that's why looking at this in the big view is important. We're all riding a roller coaster together, and we want to come off it together at the end as well. And the local on-demand economy is really the first great tool for doing so. It will allow neighbors to work together, to be in service to one another, and to monetize that exchange. We estimate that nationally 18% of the U.S. residents, have convenient access to on-demand services within their region. And after adjusting to account for the unemployed and those who are simply too poor to pay for on-demand services, we estimate that in 2015, approximately 14 billion hours of previously unpaid household labor, that is the labor that people do around their homes, is potentially in play for on-demand companies. This is a net new paying work inventory that could be done for a reasonably priced by a reasonably priced on-demand worker. We also believe, based on this, that load represents the final integration of women into the measured economy. Women still do twice the unpaid labor in the home as men, and pricing that work by making it exchangeable on the local on-demand economy gives it recognizable value, and I think that's going to have a profound effect on how we look at the relationship between gender and employment. So let's look more deeply at two of the subcategories of household services, housekeeping and laundry. So using the model I just described, 18% of the population being able to access this conveniently today, we estimate the housekeeping services vertical is worth $57.8 billion in addressable revenue this year. That is, if we actually were able to achieve that kind of market penetration. In fact, the traditional maid business only captures about $8.5 billion of that revenue. In annual revenue, and that's about 14.7% of the market. So there's a lot of opportunity there. On the other hand, laundry services account for about $35 billion in addressable revenue. And traditional laundries, dry cleaners, the coin-operated laundromat, and so forth, currently capture $25.6 billion of that industry, or 73.1% of it. So this shows that load companies, local on-demand companies, by the way, we will be using the acronym LOAD and turning it into a word, and I'm aware that there are some funny ways to turn that, and that's one of the fun things about the phrase. There's a whole load of stuff we'll be talking about. This shows that these companies have ample existing revenue to win away from existing companies, but their real opportunity lies in bringing this new labor and newly monetized labor into the marketplace. So we've identified three major business patterns. I won't call them business models because they're components that you can mix and match to create different solutions. And we're representing them here as three different variations on the current traditional funnel you may know too well from your own marketing. And we'll start off with the branded vertical on-demand portal. That is the one that we think of when we think of, for instance, Uber or TaskRabbit or any of the other major any of the unicorns.
How are you? So, Mitch,
hey, Mike, we can hear you back there. So these are very much like regular media companies, the ones that we already know. They're designed along the traditional funnel model. The transaction takes place at the bottom, at the end of all of the interaction that you're going to have with the customer. They finally say, yes, I want to buy something. You market these places as destinations. People need to come back to them for your customers, or who include your contractors, to be successful. It's a very recognizable business, and one that I think as the as we look at these unicorns, we should understand that they're valued that way because for many of the investors looking at them, they recognize the model and they can understand where it's going. So let me just summarize the branded vertical on-demand services. Assembles supply before demand is established and then advertises using traditional marketing and improved mobile customer service experience, essentially to win and keep their customers. Now, one of the keystones of Uberification is this idea of interchangeability of service providers. And in the branded vertical service, a lot of workers will just come and go from the home and probably never come back unless there happens to be a coincidence in scheduling. But we believe, and we're pretty confident about this, that there will also be a successful model in some markets where repeat business and repeat service by a single provider is critical. We have an attendee here today, for instance, working in the Medicare area where regulatorily they must provide the same provider to the customer every time or they're breaking the law. Those kinds of services are going to build around the individual's success in building relationships and then accrue value to the larger company. That brings us to the second group here of load models. And in this case, we tip the funnel on the side to show that the transaction can take place at a lot of different levels in the pyramid. Supply organizes itself through these systems, and they use tools to manage their outbound and inbound marketing, their scheduling, and so forth, as software as services, sort of CRM-like tools that allows them to close transactional loops, gather reviews, facilitate word-of-mouth marketing about their services and about their personal brand. We also believe that small and medium-sized businesses will rely on these kinds of tools as well to get into this market, as well as potentially partnering with companies like a Porch to have their service represented there. So think of this also as an extension of the directory or online presence management business that's very familiar in local media today, particularly in the IYP market. And we'll have a couple of speakers from this world, Reach Local and Talk Local, who are expanding into this market. Then the other thing about this is there's a second group of very vertically oriented on-demand tools represented by a couple of speakers today, such as BreezeWorks and FreshLime, that deliver category-specific tools for SMBs or the individual worker, such as a tool specifically for somebody who provides service in the home, like a plumber or a painter. Or a tool for a professional service to manage and integrate an on-demand component into how they offer their services to the market. And we're confident that one of the things that people want most of all is tools to do this. They don't know how. Intuit will be talking later, so we'll DocuSign about the nature of agreements and how we integrate various services to facilitate those complex combinations of supply chains I was talking about before to deliver the really truly personal experience. This is a result from Request for Startups, a Stanford-based research group that surveyed on-demand workers. Right now, 64% of them are using some form of tool to track their expenses, but you can see that they need help with schedule optimization. They need help with finding insurance or managing the payments for insurance. They need help in paying their taxes. A lot of on-demand workers will not be familiar with the idea of having to pay a monthly payment to the federal government, having been used to having it simply taken out of their salaries before. So we need tools for that kind of thing, and they all occupy this second category. And finally, we have what I would call the Wild West. The demand-first search. This inverts the funnel entirely. In this case, it starts with the request. And the request is literally, I would spend money, this much money, right now, for this product or service in this location. And we have a company introducing its service today, Yellcast, that I think represents where this market is going. These services basically say, I want the following. And we can imagine adding to that initial pattern lots of additional specifications that allow you to say, I want it in blue. I want no slave labor involved in its production. I want it to be economically or ecologically or carbon neutral, for instance, and making that a requirement before you ever even begin the rest of the discussion about what that transaction might involve, including all of the add-on services that go with it. This is going to be distributed. It's going to be available through many sites, through APIs. It'll be bundled by marketers, including marketers in both the other categories, to make the services more widely available and to drive more and more traffic down to that individual worker who's building successful relationships with local customers. And in this market, think about it this way. Apple would know today that if they made an Apple Sport watch that ran for 3 days instead of about one, for $295, that I would buy it. But the fact is, I'll let them, if I could tell them that, I would just let them figure out when they can afford to have me as a customer, which is completely different than the way that Apple treats me today. They set their price, and if I can't afford it, I can't afford it. Well, now there's a dialogue going on, and that's really an important concept to think about here as you look at this. You can imagine Nordstrom, for instance, was really the paragon of customer service, taking the experience and beginning with a demand. I need 3 shirts. I want them in blue, and I want to pay $35 for them. I happen to like the John W. Nordstrom shirt, so I use that as an example. But this transaction, which I will not read to you, shows how I could do upselling, I could do concierge service, I could add any number of other interactions or products or services to the final delivery. And in this case, you've started with the clear definition of a single transaction, but you may come out with any number of combinations of personalized results within the marketplace. That's profound, and that goes back to something that was introduced by the authors of the Clue Train Manifesto, that markets are conversations. So real give and take conversations about products and services are engaging, and they're mutually rewarding, providing information to both parties in order to improve the success of the transaction. And with demand search, or demand first search, those transactions can begin anywhere. And that's a profound change in the way the business model is going to work. So let's just quickly go back and look a little more about the impact on household spending. We believe that we're talking here primarily about this unpaid household work. It's easy to spec because you can use the U.S. time use survey. But it's also going to impact the enterprise in the future. And that, I think, is a market that is multiples of the numbers that we're about to talk about. As we said before, the total addressable market for home services today is $465 billion. We'll be detailing findings about specific verticals in upcoming research that Rick referred to earlier and about which you can find information on your memory key. But all told, BIA Kelsey estimates that the on-demand household services market currently claims about $18.5 billion in revenue at this time today. But that's dominated by Uber, which accounts for about 60% of it. And Uber is not simply a household service, it's also a work-facing service for people who are traveling on business. So it's not a true household service. The total revenue for local on-demand household services today, excluding Uber, is about $6.5 billion. And the message of all these stats and the companies that you're going to see today is simple. There's a massive opportunity to change the world and to improve the lives of millions of underemployed and unemployed people, as well as to improve the lives and flexibility of professionals who are already overemployed and are looking for additional flexibility. If the total addressable market for household services today were engaged by load companies and they charged, as Uber does, a 20% fee for facilitating that transaction, there's $93 billion on the table right now. Problem is that we have not figured out how to address the market, and that's what we need to begin to do.